Good morning. Could people please take their seats now? All right. Good morning. Bienvenue. Welcome to this meeting of the Environment and Climate Protection Committee for Tuesday, the 15th of May, 2018. We have quorum. I would like to start by welcoming everyone. We'll go through the consent agenda first, and I would remind anyone who may be here with the expectation of speaking that you still have the ability to do so. If you wish to, please register at the desk by the door, and you would have up to 5 minutes to speak. Thank you. So going through the agenda first, do we have any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Confirmation of minutes of the meeting of Monday, the 26th of March, 2018. Carried. Thank you. Communications, I would usually just say received, but Councillor Blockington's indicated he would like to lift to the agenda for a few questions this item, collection of recyclables in city parks and city festivals. So do we have support for lifting that item? Carried. Okay. Thank you. So we'll return to that then and have you ask your questions then. First item is a status update, committee inquiries and motions for the period ending 8 May 2018. Received. Thank you. Item number 2, amendments to the water bylaw 2013-360 and repeal of home dialysis grant bylaw 2007-454. That item carried? Carried. Okay. Item number 3, the Green Building Report status update. We do have a presentation on that, and I have some remarks I'd like to make as well. So we'll hold that one. And any of the information previously distributed items, we better just receive those. Anyone want to speak to those? Okay, thank you. We'll receive those. All right, Councillor Blockington, over to you then for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to everyone. Last October, I filed an inquiry at this committee with respect to the collection of recyclables in city parks and at festivals and special events within the city, and staff have provided a reply for our committee meeting, which I appreciate. There has been some ongoing discussions between staff and I in the interim, which I wish to acknowledge, but a few questions I have from the answer provided. So the first part with respect to city parks, city staff have provided some comment on their pilot project that occurred last year in the city parks, which wasn't overly successful, particularly due to the location of the carts. The program's expanding this year in 50 parks, and my first question is, how are we going to ensure that it's more successful this summer? And do you have a new, like a waste bin? I'm just thinking of bins that are used in Toronto where they're very distinct as to what goes into each category, which avoids the contamination that you've listed here in your report. So how is this year going to be different than last year?
Chair, on the first question, the pilot last year, we tried to leverage our curbside collection vehicles, so the bins were located more at the perimeter of the park. And we didn't find that successful because, of course, all the activity where people are consuming things and want to recycle is interior to the park. So the design of the pilot this year is to co-locate recycling containers with garbage containers inside the park and ensure that those containers stay side by side by locking them down so that the garbage container can't be moved, so that people have a clear choice. On the bins, we will be piloting different types of bins, and I think the way forward is to restrict the access for the recycling bins and then allow the access to the garbage bins a little more available. But also couple that with very clear instructions on what goes in each. And I will say, as committee knows, next year we will have dog waste in the green bin program, so we're gearing towards next year where residents can deposit their dog waste in the organic stream. And so that'll be something we'll be looking at. But getting ready for that, part of the purpose of the pilot is to do a full waste audit of everything that's going into the park so we can better understand the types of material we're going to be dealing with.
So in a large park like Mooney's Bay, it's about 80 acres, had one recycle bin at the pavilion. How will Mooney's Bay look this year, just as an example?
Chair, I don't think we'll be able to fully cover a park like Mooney's Bay. It's extremely high use and, as the councillor noted, a large park. But we will certainly have more than one location for recycling bins. So we'll smatter them throughout the park where they make sense, and probably at the areas where the most usage is.
Thank you for that. And my other question, Mr. Chair, is regarding the special events and festivals. So what authority does the city have to mandate or make it a requirement that festivals and special events recycle, have this on site?
Chair, I'll ask legal counsel to answer that question.
Mr. Chair, we can add that as a condition of the permit for the event, and we can look to the bylaw to see if we need to have any consequential amendments.
Sorry, I didn't hear that. Just can you repeat that, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we can look to see if we can include that as a condition of the permit for the event to ensure that waste management is part of that. And also we can look to the bylaw to see if we need any consequential amendments.
Thanks. In the staff reply, there's some provincial guides or information that has been prepared that it looks like we make festivals aware. I mean, I've sat on many seat meetings because of the number that are in my ward, and although the location of waste and recycling centers is noted on their site plan, there really isn't a great conversation about I won't use the word requirement, but the strong desire to ensure that they all provide this. It just seems odd that in 2018 we would be permitting festivals or special events which many generate a lot of waste and not have a requirement to recycle on site. And so I would really like to work with staff to get the city moving in that direction, even though we may not have a legal authority or responsibility, but that we highly encourage them. And even if we have to help with pickup, I don't know if that's possible, but we really need to make it clear as part of their guidelines for a special event that recycling is a must. So anyway, I appreciate the staff reply to my question, but I want to work with staff to going forward to ensure that these special events, not just in River Ward, but across the city, are, as a mandatory requirement, providing recycling and even e-waste, organic waste if possible. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I've got a few follow-up questions myself. It wasn't quite clear to me from the answer from legal whether we will look into whether we have that authority or if we know if we have that authority. Could I get some clarification on that, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm of the view that we do have that authority.
We do have the authority. All right. So then our next step would be to work towards making it mandatory, if that's the will of a committee and council. I am interested in, with this pilot then, Mr. Wiley, should we find that the interest in people going to parks is quite strong, and they're actually doing their best to put things in recycling, and actually, as I've seen in some cases, the response is so strong that it sort of spills over for the right reasons. Would we have the capacity to increase collection frequency or number of containers, or just wait till the end and sort of prove that people would like to do it, but actually it failed in the sense that it was at overcapacity?
Chair, we'll be monitoring the pilot for sure. We're also looking at testing a dedicated piece of collection equipment, so that'll give us more flexibility to ensure that those bins are collected in a timely manner. And we know when the peaks and valleys are, so specifically after a large event in a park, we can expect overflow of recycling and waste.
I'm familiar with that. I live across from Brewer Park, as you know, and on Monday morning, the number of seagulls on a long weekend will tell me how many people visited the park and left a lot of what they brought in behind them. I'm interested in, there's just the general public which will tend to come in and leave things behind them. Some will make the effort to bring it out. I'm wondering, just for general park bookings, outside of festivals and official events, let's just pick Brewer, where the pavilion is frequently booked by someone for a birthday party or a small community event. Are they given instructions or requirements of any kind that they are to take out what they brought in? Because all it takes is somebody's birthday party with 10 or 15 pizza boxes, and suddenly the bin is full for the entire weekend. I'm wondering whether they are given any mandatory instructions as part of that booking.
Chair, I'll ask Lila Gibbons to come up and answer that question.
We're working closely with Recreation and Culture, the Allocations Office, on providing recycling bins through the permitting process. So user groups who do get a permit through the City of Ottawa for the use of parks have the ability to pick up recycling bins. The Clear Street units, they're very easy to transport. And we also offer at our works yards and some of our recreation complexes areas where they can deposit those recycled items.
Picking that example, though, of someone who has booked the pavilion or a certain spot for their event or their party on a weekend or a weekday evening, are there any requirements that they take out, whether it's, quote, garbage or recyclables, or is the expectation that they're perfectly free to leave behind in our bins whatever they brought in?
So through the terms and conditions of use on their park permit, there is a requirement under it that they do remove all garbage that they bring into the facility. With the park staff, if we notice that there's excess garbage, we will contact the Allocations Office and notify them, and they'll in turn touch base with the user group. They can charge back for the removal of the garbage, but it is their responsibility through the terms and conditions of their permit.
I thought that was the case, but wasn't sure. You may not have numbers with you, but do we ever do that? I mean, quite frankly, bluntly, have any groups been charged, not in the sense of getting a ticket or whatever, but being financially charged?
I do know in the past we have charged back user groups for the removal of excess garbage from parks.
Okay. I'd be interested in getting that afterwards, some numbers on how often we've done that, because I certainly do see on some occasions really, first event on a Saturday morning, completely overflowing bins, and there's the capacity for an entire long weekend, and something we should be aware of acting on. Thank you. Any other questions on this item? All right. Do we receive this? Suppose we already received. End of item. Thank you. All right, moving then to what will be our main substantive item today. We are going to get a presentation from staff. I'd just like to make a few remarks to start with. Buildings account for almost half of, so this item is the Green Building Report, a status update. Buildings account for almost half of the greenhouse gas pollution produced in Ottawa. The city has therefore committed to constructing any new facility over 500 square meters to LEED standards. This ensures we have energy efficient and sustainable buildings for the future. Aujourd'hui, nous allons recevoir une mise à jour sur ces bâtiments. I'd like to welcome Mark Hutchinson, the Vice President of Green Building Programs at the Canada Green Building Council, who is here today in support of the city's green building initiatives. Is here with us? There. Thank you. And the Canada Green Building Council is a not-for-profit national organization working since 2002 to advance green building and sustainable community development practices in Canada. The Council is the license holder for the LEED rating system in Canada. I would also like to welcome Randy Burgess, the Vice President of Communications and Content, and Mark Gowdy, the CEO of the Ottawa Sports and Entertainment Group. In partnership with the city, the group transformed Lansdowne Park into a go-to destination for residents and visitors to our city. Leo Morissette from the city's Recreation, Cultural and Facility Service Department is also here today, and he continues to play an active role at Lansdowne Park. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Au début de l'année, nous avons reçu d'excellentes nouvelles au sujet du projet de réaménagement du parc Lansdowne, première collectivité écologique d'Ottawa, conçue de façon à respecter les principes LEED. Lansdowne, we learned, is the first green community designed to follow LEED principles, not just a building, but a community as a whole. All credits were satisfied for the LEED Neighborhood Development Program, and Lansdowne achieved LEED Stage 3 Built Project Silver certification. Based on current information provided by the Canada Green Building Council, Lansdowne is the first project in Canada to receive this certification. Les quartiers certifiés LEED sont des collectivités polyvalentes, adaptées aux piétons et convenablement reliées aux collectivités voisines. Revitalized in 2014, Lansdowne is now a sustainable and vibrant community with high-density housing and good access to pedestrians, cyclists, and transit users. Alors, félicitations à l'équipe qui a travaillé au projet de réaménagement du parc Lansdowne, notamment pour l'obtention de cette attestation importante et unique en son genre. Green buildings and neighborhoods help lower greenhouse gas emissions and water consumption. They reduce the amount of materials and waste during construction and decrease life cycle and utility costs. They also foster a healthier environment both indoors and out. Alain Gontier, Director of Infrastructure Services, will now give us a status update on the city's progress in building green. Thank you. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. So before starting, I just want to acknowledge other people that contributed to this report, and also to reinforce some of the acknowledgments that you have made. To my right is Kim Siri. Kim is a strategist with Infrastructure Services and was the author of this report. We also have Andy Smith, which is sitting a bit behind me. He's the manager for design and construction for our facilities group. And also want to reiterate the appreciation for Mr. Hutchinson for being here from the Green Building Council, certainly for the support and the guidance that the council has provided the city over the years. And also to Mr. Morissette, Mr. Burgess, and Mr. Goody of OSAG for also taking time of their busy schedule for being here to be for the recognition related to Lansdowne, and certainly for making Lansdowne a true sign of leadership and success in terms of when we're looking at public-private partnerships in the city. So when we look at the green building policy, we pretty much have to go back to 2005 for its inception at the city, where council first approved the policy. The policy was amended in 2007. And since then, there has been a requirement for staff to report back to Community and Council on an annual basis in terms of the status of its green building projects. The green building policy applies to all buildings that are basically over 500 square meters. And basically, the minimum requirement that we're required to achieve is a certified level. Now, under the green building policy, there are 4 levels. There's basically certified, silver, gold, and platinum. But if we go back in 2015, Environment Committee actually at the time provided a direction that staff try to achieve gold status where possible, and that's where we're looking at the size and the business case for the facility to make sure that that level would be warranted and justified. Certainly, that has demonstrated certainly the city's leadership when it comes to environmental designs. So the city continues to demonstrate a strong commitment to sustainable environmental practices. Green building practices show responsible management and good business sense. They reduce the impact of construction and building operation on the environment and resources, and they do reduce the overall life cycle cost, which is a key objective of the LEED program. In essence, the city uses LEED to verify that municipal buildings have achieved the sustainability targets. And LEED, as the chair has indicated, is an internationally recognized rating system that independently certifies a building has achieved basically energy efficiency, reduced environmental impacts. And here in Canada, that is administered through the Canada Green Building Council. So as I mentioned, the city started to apply LEED in 2005, and what we've seen is since that time is really a level of maturity both in terms of our industry, whether it's the construction industry or the consulting industry, in terms of the application of sustainable environmental practices, especially in terms of our building construction. And even though we have a minimum threshold of 500 square meters in terms of our buildings, what we see is that even smaller buildings apply some of the similar principles on those buildings. So even though we may not be seeking formal certification, we're still implementing the good practices that are being applied on a bigger facility. We also apply it to our smaller facilities. There's certainly a number of opportunities when it comes to LEED buildings. One of the pieces that we're often asked is basically the cost implication of achieving different LEED certifications. What we've seen over time is that basically to meet a certified level, we don't really see an increase in cost, mainly because of the point that I mentioned before is because it's become sound and good building practices, it's pretty much been incorporated into our building practices. So there's really not an incremental cost to achieve a certified level. When we're looking at silver, we're looking at about a 2% increase, and the gold status is we're looking at about a 5% increase. Now, the important thing to note is that that's on the initial construction cost. What we also expect is that with the efficiency of these buildings, when we're looking at from a life cycle perspective, that's where we see efficiencies over time, and those percentages really get gained over the life of the assets. So there's certainly a number of benefits to building green buildings. What we see is basically a lot of the elements that really speak to quality of experience, quality of use of the building. So better ventilation, less toxicity in the building materials that are being used, a lot more daylighting that's being used in our facilities, and that's certainly apparent when you look at recreational facilities, for example, that are built today compared to the ones that were built 30, 40 years ago with very few windows, very poor air circulation. A very big contrast with the facilities that are being built today with a lot more natural daylighting, a lot more window, a lot more air exchanges that really helps to improve the quality of experience that people have out of our facilities. What we've also seen since its inception is an evolution in the LEED certification process itself. So to date, a lot of the buildings that we've built have been built to the LEED 2009 standard, and as of October 2016, that was a cutoff for certification for any new building. So any building that's being certified or registered, I should say, after October 2016 are actually being registered under the new LEED program, which is LEED version 4. And LEED version 4 really focuses on not just the initial design, but really on the sustainability of the facilities over time. So what we see are really improvements and increased emphasis on location and transportation, so access to the facility in terms of public transportation, active mobility. We're looking at the sustainable sites, so those that really minimize impacts on the ecosystem and on our water resources. Big focus on water efficiency, that's both for indoor and outdoor water use reduction and reuse. Focus on energy and atmosphere, so a focus now on building energy monitoring to make sure that if we're designing facilities to meet a certain objective, that we actually have monitoring in place to ensure that over time that we are meeting those requirements. And those are elements that we're integrating into our facilities, and over time we'll be able to provide a bit more reporting on those elements. Material and resource, really looking at a life cycle approach to the materials that are being used, really looking at locally sourced materials to try to minimize transportation impacts. And then the last one is the indoor environmental quality, the elements that I spoke to in the previous slide. So it's not just about building a green building, it's also building one that really improves the quality of experience in our facilities. So as I mentioned in a previous slide, a couple of notes is that we do target gold where we're able to demonstrate basically the business case is warranted. We're also applying now in our buildings basically the new LEED version 4 requirements. There are still a few sites that were registered under the old 2009 system that because they were too far advanced, we'll continue under that process. But we've had facilities where they were registered under the old program, but we're actually proceeding with the certification under the new program. And François Dupuis expansion is one that I'm making a note of that is actually seeking certification under the new program. Because these are new requirements, and even for the Green Building Council, they're gathering more information in terms of feedback from the industry. We'll continue to work closely with the Green Building Council in terms of ensuring that we're appropriately applying the standards to our building, and that we can ensure that we get the greatest benefit out of the updated standards. When it comes to LEED, basically we could say that the City of Ottawa is a leader when it comes to the application of LEED and green building construction, and we certainly share that spotlight with 5 other Canadian cities, be it Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, and Montreal. And later on we'll be pointing to, probably in a number of occasions, Lansdowne. Lansdowne is the first one that's actually being recognized as a neighborhood development, and I'll provide a bit more detail shortly. So in terms of the where we stand right now in terms of number of buildings that have been certified, we have 27 buildings that have been certified. 5 have reached gold certification, 12 with silver, and 10 are certified. The committee report provides a breakdown of each of the facility and what certification was provided for each. The latest one to receive certification was the Metro Recreation Complex, and we received the silver certification in 2017. And we also have 6 facilities that are built that are currently going through the certification process. And we're hoping to have an update on these facilities as part of our 2018 update. And the projects that are listed on the screen are the ones that are going through the certification process, and I will highlight some of them shortly in my presentation. So a couple of projects that we want to highlight. The first one is our beautiful Ottawa Arc Gallery that recently opened on April 28th to great fanfare. It is another sign of a true public-private partnership in terms of really improving the quality of experience when it comes to cultural space in the city. When we look at the public space for the art gallery, we're really looking at a partnership with the arts community and with Ottawa U in terms of the black box theater, additional classroom. The certification level that we're seeking for the public space of the art gallery is silver, and we will be going through the certification process, and we'll be reporting on the status of certification in a future update. Certainly the pièce de résistance is the Lansdowne Park redevelopment project. So the great news that we received a little over a month ago is that Lansdowne was the first neighborhood development to receive a level 3 certification. So under a neighborhood development speaks not just to the private component, it speaks to the entire development. So when we're looking at neighborhood development on this site, we are looking at both the private and the public sector components. The neighborhood development is certainly a more stringent process. It has 3 levels. To date, the city had achieved level 2, as a number of other municipalities across the country have. There's about 12 municipalities across the country that are going through the neighborhood development process. But Lansdowne is the first one that actually achieved the final step, the third and final step, which is the built form. So it's the constructed facility, and we're certainly pleased to be able to report on this fairly significant success, and certainly want to acknowledge again the contribution from OSEG in terms of being a partner in that success. The next ones, 2 next projects that I wanted to focus are 2 new fire stations that we recently opened in February of 2018. Fire Station 36 is located on Sayreville in Beacon Hill, Sayreville Ward, and Station 55 is located on Portobello Boulevard in Orleans in the Cumberland Ward. And certainly we were very proud to be able to open these 2 facilities that not only provide key service to the community, but also have been built really with sustainability and green principles in mind. So there's certainly a number of elements that have contributed to the green success of these buildings, and certainly would be open to expand if there are any specific questions on these buildings. The next one that I referred to in my presentation was the Francois Dupuis Recreation Center expansion. So this is a fairly significant expansion to an existing community pool. This includes a fairly large gymnasium, rock wall, some community space, and it was certified under LEED version 4 with a silver certification. So in this case here, this facility expansion was actually registered prior to October 2016. But because we were fairly early in the design process, we were actually able to incorporate the new LEED version 4 requirements into the design and construction, and are now seeking basically silver certification under this new process. And then last but not least, if we're looking to the future, the Ottawa Central Library. This is a joint facility between Ottawa Public Library and Library and Archives Canada. And for this facility, we are targeting LEED Gold certification, and we will have a report coming to FEDCO in the coming months, giving more detail on the funding strategies and how we're moving forward with the procurement on that project. So certainly more details to come, and certainly one that we will be highlighting in future green building report updates. So in terms of next steps, we will certainly continue to abide by Council's policy, leverage basically sustainability principles in all building constructions that we move forward. We will also continue to increase our understanding of the LEED version 4 certifications, and certainly working very closely with the Green Building Council. And we'll certainly make sure that we continue to demonstrate our leadership, not only in this city, but also across Canada in terms of our environmental and sustainability stewardship. That concludes our presentation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brockton indicated he had questions. Anyone else who might like to? Please let me know. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to staff for your detailed presentation. How do you determine whether a new build will be certified silver or gold?
If we go back to 2015, the direction that we received from Environment Committee, we start with trying to target LEED Gold. And if we see that the business case is difficult to achieve for LEED Gold, then that's when we would be looking at LEED certification. So we look at the type of facility, the size of the facility, its function, and also our ability to be able to achieve the required certification, and that really forms the basis of our decision. But I think what's important to note is we always start with LEED Gold as our starting point.
Excellent. Can you just confirm there's no provincial requirement on municipalities to do this? This is voluntary because it's the right thing to do?
I'm not aware that there's any provincial legislation that requires this. This is basically a good practice.
For existing buildings that are bleeding hot air, cold air, depending on the time of year, costing us a lot of money to maintain, is the plan to retrofit these buildings when they come to the end of their life cycle, or are we taking more proactive steps in existing buildings to address roof issues, HVAC systems, before they come to the end? Because there are obviously cost savings that you've identified by going to this type of certification. How is that being tackled? I completely am on board with new builds, but there's probably many existing city facilities now that are costing us a lot of money because they have very aged systems in them. So what's the plan in that regard?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, there's 27 that have LEED certification, and we have hundreds and hundreds of buildings. So we work very closely with Mr. Morset's group, with the Building Energy Efficiency Management Group. They basically look at the performance of buildings, and they do undertake basically upgrades and modifications on component levels to really try to improve the efficiency of the building. When we're looking at renewal opportunities, we also work closely with Mr. Morset's group to make sure that as we're upgrading and renewing a facility, we're also trying to address basically areas where there have been energy concerns. So whether it's in terms of roof material and designs, in terms of heating and ventilation, basically building envelope, those are elements that we certainly try to incorporate into all of our retrofits.
And finally, are we aware of any provincial or federal grant or ongoing funding that helps municipalities or municipal corporations with these types of retrofit costs? I mean, it's in the billions and billions of dollars in this province. Is there any existing funds that we can tap into to help expedite these changes?
Yeah, I'll start, and maybe Mr. Wiley or Mr. Morissette can pipe in. If we look at the Building Canada funding, the Building Canada funding, for example, had three main pillars. Basically, one was around public transit, one was around cultural recreational facilities, and one of them was around green infrastructure. And the city, I believe, was able to tap into some of that funding for building retrofits. So there are programs that often come about either at a provincial or federal level that tends to target specific initiatives, whether it's active transportation, whether it's energy reduction, especially under the whole greenhouse gas reduction programs. And the city certainly does avail itself of the opportunities to apply for those programs.
Thank you. Councillor McKinney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to staff for the report. Since 2007, I guess the word that's always jumped out at me is target, and that I realize that there's no provincial requirement to make our buildings all LEED certified and on up to LEED Gold. But when I think about social housing providers, Ottawa Community Housing, there was a housing provider in Councillor Chernyshchenko's ward that just also did a passive approach to their design and construction of supportive housing. I wonder why it is that we can do it. We can aim for higher. And right now it would seem that it is our affordable housing providers who are doing so, because it makes perfect sense. The people who live in the buildings that we're providing housing for derive great benefit from that. So I wonder why we don't always try to achieve at least gold and a passive approach to design and construction.
So, Chair, as I mentioned, our starting point is always gold, and then from there, if we see that basically there's a very difficult business case to be made, because because there's still a value proposition, especially over the life of the asset. At that point, we would be looking at silver, but we always start with gold in terms of the target, and that's since basically the last committee direction back in 2015. When you look at the list of projects that are identified in a report, what you'll see is basically the buildings that were done in recent years pretty much have achieved, for the most part, silver as a minimum, because that was a target at that point. Even though the minimum that we're trying to achieve is certified, we've always tried to achieve a higher level than just meeting a certified level. So to your point, we are always trying to aim for a higher level, but we also recognize that there still has to be value in terms of achieving that higher level status.
And what would that value be in terms of achieving, how do you measure value in terms of, I would see it as, much more significant reduction in greenhouse gases, water consumption, energy. What are the value measurements that you put on, when we go from gold, say, to silver?
So all of the LEED certification, the different levels are based on achieving points for incorporating different elements. So at some point it becomes, what does it cost to achieve a certain level of points to get you to that next level? And that's really where the value proposition comes in, is basically to be able to achieve that next level. What's the value of investment that's required? That's something that changes from building to building. So it's not a kind of a uniform approach. It will all depend in terms of the type of facility that's being built, the size, where it's being located, because that's really going to be one of the big drivers in terms of our ability to achieve the points that are required for a certain level of certification.
And how do we consider our procurement process in how we design buildings? Are we just is it lowest bidder, or do we look for quality in our process for procurement? Are we looking for architects who can actually build buildings? It might cost us a little bit more, but they will be more sustainable. They will be have a higher level of design, and the design and construction will lead to a more passive approach. Do we consider that? Do we consider the quality of design in our procurement process?
Chair, absolutely. Even though we follow a competitive procurement process, we still specify basically our requirements that we're expecting through our procurement process. So when we're dealing with buildings, we will specify the level of LEED certification that we're looking to achieve. We're also going to be looking for the qualification of the individuals that are going to be involved in the project to make sure that they have the required skill sets to be able to provide us the quality facility that we are looking for.
But we're not at the point where we will accept a higher bid because we know that what they're offering is higher quality.
Well, I think when we're going through a competitive process, we have to be fair also to the process. So it's up to us to identify our level of expectation, how the bids will be evaluated. And then when we evaluate the bids, we evaluate the bids on your ability to meet those objectives. If we're looking for a facility that may require a higher standard, then that's something that we would be specifying to make sure that basically we're providing everybody with a fair and equal opportunity as part of the process.
But as you stated, sometimes that level will come down depending on cost or ability by that architect or developer to actually build the building. Is that correct?
Yeah, and certainly if we look at two elements of our procurement process, when we're procuring our consultants, our architects and engineers, there is definitely an opportunity to build in additional points for quality of design, quality of approach, because those services are largely based on quality of service. It's not just about price. When we're dealing with the procurement for the construction, that's more of a competitive bid process, so that's where it's important to identify what our designs are expecting to deliver what we want built. But to your point on the design piece, very much there is an opportunity to provide points where we're getting higher quality of design through the teams that are being advanced or provided.
And just a question under the LEED version 4. I know that it's probably it's still pretty new, but one of the components of that was a sustainable site. What does a sustainable site look like? Do we know that yet? Or?
Well, sustainable site is really looking at minimizing our impacts on the ecosystem of the site, minimizing our impacts on the water resources of the site. So it's really taking more of a holistic approach to the site itself and not just the building itself that's being constructed.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Lieber.
Thanks. Question for you with respect to energy sustainability and the LEED standard. I note that one of the criticisms that the Environmental Stewardship Advisory Committee has had of our policy is that energy and renewable energy is not a core feature of LEED. Taking a quick look at LEED 4, version 4, it looks like there is much more of an emphasis on both producing and using renewable energies in order to achieve certification. Does that mean that we are automatically going to be moving in that direction, or are there choices that are still going to have to be made by the city in terms of getting us to a more sustainable energy approach to city facilities?
So, Chair, you're correct that LEED 4 provides probably more of a holistic approach when we're looking at a green building, and there is an increased focus on energy. How we can achieve those energy efficiencies, there are certainly different options that are available to the city, but I would say there is definitely a good component in LEED that speaks to energy efficiency. I think and this was discussed at the environmental stewardship, is when we're looking at LEED also provides more of a holistic approach to green building. Energy management is certainly an important element. It's not the only element. So it's really trying to provide a broader perspective around when we're talking about green building. It's around talking about the siting. It's talking about the access to the facility in terms of active transportation, public transit, the materials that are being used that will reduce the impacts on the environments and on the users. So I would say it is an important element. It's not the only element as part of LEED 4. LEED 4 just basically broadens that focus.
Okay, so we would be still able to achieve LEED certification without a really strong focus on renewable energy sources moving forward, unless we made that a part of our mandate?
I would say that in the LEED certification that we've put forward, energy efficiency has always been part, and then a growth part of.
So there's energy efficiency, but I take a look at the energy and atmosphere component of LEED 4, which speaks specifically to using and even producing renewable energies as part of the certification process. What I'm hearing, I think, from you, though, is that we can still achieve LEED certification without necessarily the benefit of the points that would normally be associated under LEED 4 with those certification criteria?
No, I would say that the energy component is an important element to be able to allow us to achieve the LEED certification. And even on the number of LEED certifications, we have made investments in terms of green energy production to be able to achieve our LEED certification. So that actually has been an integral part of our process and our ability to achieve our desired level of certification.
Okay. And you consider that to be a good thing, presumably, in terms of our approach moving forward?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no others with questions, I'll ask a few myself. Councillor Brockington touched on the question, I believe it was Councillor Brockington, on renovation and retrofitting of buildings. My understanding is we don't currently have I myself am or was, I suppose I still am, LEED certified, though it's probably expired back prior to becoming a councillor. And I know that in the meantime I've just followed from a distance new levels or types of certification for existing buildings and renovation. To what degree does the city go through a certification process. I don't believe that council ever set this same sort of minimum standard that we have for new buildings. We have not done so for renovation. Is that the case?
There's some expansions where we do definitely apply the LEED certification. The Francois Dupuis expansion is an example where it is an expansion to an existing building, and that expansion was subject to the LEED certification. So a lot of it will depend on the size of the expansion that's being done and the opportunities to better integrate basically some of the LEED requirements into the process. In terms of a city perspective, we do have some of the staff that are LEED certified, and when we hire our architects and engineers, we do also require them to be LEED certified.
So just to be precise, it's somewhat ad hoc then at the moment. If a building is undergoing not just a renovation but an expansion, in the case of Francois Dupuis, you could say a portion of that is new build. You have been applying this aim for gold minimum silver standard, but that's a bit of on a case-by-case basis when it comes to renovations?
Well, if the renovations fit into the over 500 square meter, then we would be applying the same standard as a new building.
Mm-hmm. And if a building is not actually, a renovation can mean many things, but imagine that the building shell itself is not expanding, it's purely an internal, more than remodeling, but perhaps gutting and rebuilding, and opportunity to redo windows, insulation of the outer shell. Again, is that standard applies to it, the 500 square meters on renovation, or is that possibly, what I'm trying to get at is, have we as a council failed to provide sufficient guidance or direction on renovation as opposed to on new build?
Chair, when we're looking at renovation, I was indicating before, we work very closely with our facility operators in terms of looking at the performance of the building, and wherever there are opportunities to improve the performance of the building, either is through changes to our heating and ventilation, improving the building envelope, whether it's the walls, whether it's the roof, whether it's the windows, we will incorporate that into the facility. What we also look at it is from a life cycle approach. So if there's investments that we can make that will reduce the overall life cycle cost of the facility, that provides also the added benefit. So it very much follows the sustainability principles that the Green Building Policy tries to embed. And as I indicated before, a lot of these practices now have become basically just a way of doing business. It's the right thing to do, and not everything necessarily requires a certification stamp to be able to confirm that basically, yes, we've adhered to some of those approaches to our retrofits. The challenge we're often dealing with the retrofits is we're only dealing with components of the building, so it's difficult to achieve an overall certification when we're only targeting certain elements, and those tend to be focused on the areas where we can get the most value or return.
Okay, well, I guess what I take out of that is that I know we have some very knowledgeable staff, very dedicated to, in our Beam group and others, to retrofitting buildings, and they continue to do so. I'll just look for ways if we can, provide them the clearer guidance in some form as to whether there's a particular standard or certification we should be aiming for, but that's something that we can follow up on in the future. I know also that we have applied for, as a city, funding from both the provincial and federal levels, and been successful, and continue to apply for sources of funding in order to help us increase the amount of work we're doing in that area. So I thank staff who are submitting those applications and those who are actually doing the work. Finally, I guess I'm just wondering, since a number of my colleagues have asked this question, it's sort of a vague language around we will try for gold, but where it doesn't make sense or there isn't a value proposition, etc., that's rather vague language that we have trouble with. I understand you evaluate it. We haven't given you a solid number such as if the return on investment won't be achieved in this period of time, don't do it, and if it does, go for it. Can you give me a few examples of types of buildings or recent projects where you might have decided it wasn't worth aiming for gold because of the nature of that facility? Doors and windows are open all the time for some reason, or I guess I'm just wondering, is there an example you can think of where we would not have pursued it, and why, what the criteria might have been for ruling it out?
Unfortunately, Chair, that's probably not something I can just provide. I can certainly follow up with that. And part of that is the direction from Environment Committee was in 2015, so really we're looking at buildings that would have been done afterwards. So I'd have to go back to see if there are such cases, and what were the elements that made it such that our decision was to follow silver instead of going for gold.
Okay, I'd appreciate getting that. I think the rest of my colleagues would too, because there has been that sort of that vagueness around why we don't sometimes pursue it, and to have a clearer understanding of what might trigger that decision, whether it is purely a financial return or not being worth it in a sense for a certain kind of building that may have constant air leakage or energy leakage anyway. I'd like to understand that better. All right. Well, thank you very much for this. Seeing no other questions from my colleagues, I appreciate this presentation very much. Thanks once again to those who've attended for various reasons. Your own work in this area, and is this report received then? Yes. Thank you. That does take us then to we have no in-camera items. Notices of motion, I have one myself. It is a motion where we need to suspend rules of procedure in order to advance this. So it is on plastic waste. I have a motion that will ask our staff to identify to participate in federal consultations on addressing plastic waste of various kinds. But in order to give that direction to them, we need to suspend the rules and allow me to read that motion and debate it. Do we have support for that? Okay. It is a motion where we need to suspend the rules of procedure. So we have approval for that? Yep. Okay. Thank you. So I will, it's reasonably short. I will read this motion since I believe it was circulated in advance, but for those who may not have had a chance to read it. It wasn't, okay, it was meant to be. But the item is plastic waste. Whereas plastic waste and litter pose an increasingly serious threat to the health of our river and stream ecosystems, and whereas the City of Ottawa is responsible for the collection and management of a growing volume of plastic waste, but has little to no control over the widespread use of single-use disposable plastics within our boundaries, and whereas the problem of plastic pollution in rivers and streams, but also in marine environments, is of growing concern to the residents of Ottawa, and whereas the federal government has recently launched a public consultation on moving Canada toward zero plastic waste and is seeking input from Canadians, Indigenous peoples, industry, municipalities, non-profit organizations, and research institutions, and whereas the federal government consultation seeks input on how Canada can reduce plastic waste and marine litter in order to develop a federal, provincial, territorial approach to keep plastic within the economy and out of landfills and the environment, therefore be it resolved that staff submit comments to the federal consultation on plastic waste from the municipal perspective. And therefore be it resolved that staff investigate best practices and programs that have been adopted by other municipalities to reduce the use of single-use plastics, including but not limited to plastic straws, cutlery, bags, and takeout containers and cups, and the staff report back to Council on their findings as part of the broader waste diversion report coming to Council in 2019. Councillor Leeper, questions? Yeah.
So how do you foresee that the staff are going to be coming up with that position? What would be the next steps in order to ensure council input?
I know I've spoken with staff on this. Do you have any thoughts on how we would consult with the public or council as part of this developing our staff position, recommendation?
Chair, as part of the refresh of the Ottawa waste strategy that we'll be conducting in 2019 prior to coming to committee with a report, we'll be doing both consultation with councillors and with the public.
Is that sufficient or follow up on it?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Yes. So this we would consult as broadly as possible, but given that E word that is approaching in the coming months and stand down of certain practices, we would have to ensure that E being election in this case, not e-waste. Sorry if I'm being vague. We would need to develop that in conformity with any election restrictions over that period.
Yeah, and I won't be vague because I do anticipate that plastic waste will become a election issue over the course of the next several months, and I want to make sure that the position of the municipality, the position of the city in dealing with the feds is informed by a council that may or may not have been elected to move forward with a particular perspective on the issue. May I just ask, Chair, we've suspended the rules of notice in order to debate this motion today. What is the time sensitivity on this?
The public consultation is now open federally, but do staff recall when the closing date for that is? It's really just getting started, and it's a nationwide consultation. So,
Chair, we're not aware. We'll get back to you.
So I appreciate that lack of an answer on that might be something that we would want to have at least in time for council with this motion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then may I just ask, Chair, I'm sure there will be other questions, but if we, before voting on this, if you could just give us a few minutes just to read the lengthy motion carefully before voting on it. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Brockington. Yep.
I'm open to what's being proposed today, but I think what will help this committee and all members of council before it gets to council is to understand what the federal mandate is of this consultation. What is the breadth of it? What are they trying to tease out of municipalities as far as feedback? Councillor or the chair provides in the second therefore clause some examples of plastic, straws, bags, cutlery. That's just a drop in the bucket of plastic use and consumption. So I just want to make sure that as a municipality we are not just limiting our focus to those things that are listed, but really, at my Earth Day event I had members of my community ask, what's the city strategy on plastic usage in the city as a whole, not just straws, which is sort of the flavor of the week. So if we could just get that information before council, I think that would better inform us. And I'd really like an opportunity to see sort of the staff submission before it goes to the feds. If this is a 6-month process, then maybe this is something we can talk about in the fall before our submission goes in, just to make sure we've covered off everything. But
Chair, we'll prepare a briefing memo prior to council so you know the breadth and the timing around the federal consultation. And certainly we'll find an avenue to allow councillors to take a look at whatever submission is proposed by staff prior to going to the federal government.
Any other questions from the councillors on this? So effectively, we would be, through this motion, I understand there's still some gaps in terms of how exactly staff would work on this. My intention in working with staff and bringing this forward at the moment was to respond what has become a growing and very genuine concern of our residents. We are getting those from our own decision about green bins and organics to why plastic bags are being allowed in was, of course, an issue and a concern about, yes, success, great on the diversion of organics, but what about the plastics? Outside of that, the ongoing use of plastics, their presence on our streets and in our parks, and then a whole range of other forms that they take. I was pleased to see that there was recognition at the federal level of just how important this issue was, and that I saw as an opportunity, rather than our being one of hundreds of municipalities countrywide which are all trying to come up with their own approach to this, that we actually develop a national approach, at minimum a provincial one, and so this was an effort to get the city developing a position and coming forward, staff coming forward to options with us on this. All right, Councillor Leeper.
Yeah, I'm happy to vote yes for this today, but Mr. Wiley, if we could get that briefing with some fairly explicit next steps that staff would take before council, and we'll take a look at it with fresh eyes then.
Yeah, we can do that, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you.
Vice Chair Shirley?
Yeah, just a question, on what basis will the report be done? Because I'm not aware of any policy direction we've given staff on this subject.
Well, we do have, as is referenced at the end, we do have the broader waste diversion report that's, you could say, being held back for quite a few months or even years, primarily because of the evolving provincial standards and approach, and the city's been waiting for clearer signals from the province as to how we can and then to realign our own work in that area. So that's a bit of a circuitous way to answering your question, but that report itself needs to be prepared and is due and is on our agenda already. My goal was for this to feed in to part of that it, in a sense, highlight the importance of plastics, what might not otherwise have been given so much attention, would get more attention now.
But remember when we were on Board of Public Health dealing with reusable bags and the consequences of people not washing their bags and things like that, and we haven't done anything on that. So just hope that this is all going to be resolved at the same time.
That can certainly be one of the factors to take into account, what health implications of reuse of bags, and whether that is a recommendation in the end that moving towards more reusable bags, that we'd be aware of the, I suppose, pros and cons of any of those. All right, I see our staff taking notes as we're adding more and more onto their list. Are there other questions on this? It's clear to me in moving this that there are still some gaps in information that that committee would like. I guess what I would ask at this point is that the overall direction is clear enough as to what we're trying to target here, but there is still some discomfort at the lack of detail in some areas that we would have asked staff to prepare a briefing note. So if we could approve it today, but with the proviso that full approval at council would depend on getting that information. So I'm seeing some nods, and all right. So can we carry this motion then? Thank you. Okay. No other notices of motions or motions that I'm aware of today. Any inquiries? Other business? Seeing none. Adjournment. Thank you very much.